We're going into season 4 here in the garden, and it's really exciting to see biodiversity thriving. I planted these perennial daisies last year, and this year they just came back with potency blooms. Like this plant is really blooming, and it will last throughout July. Unlike some of the other daisies that die off in the spring, some of these wild daisies they actually stay blooming throughout the season. The sage just came up, and this was actually an onion that we left in the ground accidentally, and it came back and produced this really awesome bloom, attracting tons of bees. As you can see, I plant a lot of coneflowers. These are actually Rudbeckias. I believe this is Black Eyed Susan, and I love these plants. They come out year after year. They produce a ton of color, a ton of beauty, and this year, right after a good rain, they just kind of bloom like big proliferous flowers, and they attract a lot of insects. Like here you can see this bee really working this flower. And something that I like to do when I'm planting especially gardens for pollinators is to plant similar types of flowers together, so that way when the bees come they have a strategy on how to tackle this flower, and they don't have to switch strategy back and forth because a lot of the same flowers are blooming and are of the same kind. Here I believe this is a sweat bee, that beautiful green color. These Rudbeckias, actually I didn't buy these seeds. I was out at a conference in the middle of central Massachusetts, and out on an open field at the end of the season they were completely out of bloom, so I couldn't really tell what kind of flowers they were, but there was a sign that said wildflowers in a wild meadow, and I picked a ton of different kinds, what looked to me like different kinds of flowers, and I planted them in the spring. And it's been exciting and fascinating to see the variety of flowers that I picked and how they are just becoming acclimated to the garden. This is like second or third season that they bloom, and every year they actually look a little bit different. So it's really exciting. I really love designing with this plant. It produces a ton of food, a lot of color, and they attract a ton of pollinators. Another aspect of planting coneflowers and herbs like mints, sages, and other plants that we use for our own consumption as human beings is that insects, especially pollinators, are able to get or obtain what's called the secondary metabolites from some of these plants. Like the same plants that we use for antibiotic treatments, or that have antibiotic properties, are some of those same benefits. Pollinators are able to abstract them from these same plants. So when you're thinking about putting together a pollinator-friendly garden, is not just about pollen and the production of food, but it's also what do these creatures need to heal themselves. And moving on to a different kind of pollinator, we have the great black wasp. These tend to be solitary insects that build their nest underground, and they come out in the spring to pollinate flowers. Here you can actually see quite a few of them working the mountain mint. One of the reasons why I like to have wasps in my garden is because they can be parasitic, which means they will lay their eggs inside of the eggs of other insects. Like here, for example, you can see these larvae, these caterpillars that will be normally eating my tomato plants. They are overwhelmed by the eggs of different wasps. Here you can see this is a paper wasp feeding on the flowers of a bronze fennel plant. I love the bronze fennel. It produces a ton of flowers that attract a ton of pollinators. But this year I actually noticed that it provides shelter, provides habitat for young praying mantis. These are nymphs. These guys still don't have wings, so it's harder for them to get away from predators. But because the bronze fennel is next to a lot of the Rudbeckias, they just hang out together and they have places to hide and also places to hunt. Like these praying mantis, these guys hunting, and here you can see in a slow motion. In a second, you're gonna see a bee coming into the frame. Kind of has a face off, and then it flies away. Obviously, that bee was too big for these young praying mantis. But here you can see another praying mantis, fully grown with wings, hanging out in the garden, probably laying eggs for next season towards the end of the season. The praying mantis is really the army of the garden. They are the heavy hitter predator insects that will help you control pests. Encouraging biodiversity in the garden is not just the right thing to do for the insects that live here. It's also the most practical way for me as a gardener to manage the garden. I don't have to water regularly because the soils are mulched. I also don't have a pest management program because I have praying mantis, snakes, and birds that take care of all of that. Essentially, what I have done here is to support the different organisms that naturally want to be here, and they keep each other in balance. Like by mulching the soil heavily, I have attractor snails, which are now supporting a growing population of garden snakes. There's birds, there's songbirds, and all of these creatures are essentially coexisting in a system that also supports crop production at a small scale that allows me to, get a great deal of enjoyment and a lot of food out of a very small piece of land.